To welcome everyone who's here and say thank you again to West Academic for putting this panel on. And thank you to those of you who are joining us who are new professors. This is extremely exciting, to be part of what I think, just in my opinion, is the best profession and the best job we could possibly have. So really welcome. I'm going to share my screen as well and introduce myself for a minute. So my book is Contracts, a Real World Casebook, and is in its second edition now. Just a little bit about me. I am the outgoing Associate Dean of Research and Engagement at St. Louis University Law School, and I just am joining the faculty at St. John's Law School in New York City. So we're going to be talking today about current events, but I wanted to just take a minute to situate this within the structure that Professor Medill so helpfully set out for us. So I had kind of broken this down into, building and teaching law school courses, which I know is our topic today, into a few components that I know the other speakers are going to be talking about as well. Learning outcomes and assessment, creating the syllabus that we were talking about, working backward from your goals and designing assessments that go along with it to make sure that those goals are achieved. Your content and substantive knowledge, this is something I really got into when writing the textbook and thinking about what your law school requires versus, for those of you who are teaching a first year required course, what's on the bar exam, et cetera. A lot of this information, I think other folks are going to pick up on, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. The teaching style is something there's an authenticity to it that I think comes from practice and experimentation, and it takes time to develop classroom management skills and to develop your style. But where I'm going to focus on today is this piece on engaging students and getting students to be active participants. And so we think about active learning. And this is really beyond the, as Professor Medill was calling it, just grinding through or just going through cases and kind of having answers about what that case does. And I think many of the speakers today are going to be taking out aspects of this to talk a little bit more in depth, but that could be working on real world type problems and flipping the classroom. This could be opportunities on your classroom course management system to do things like offering opportunities for bulletin boards or for people to write in with their thoughts or to analyze an issue. I like to do things like play games, have music and other mnemonics in my class. And I've recently discovered, this was just happenstance because of the pandemic, but QR codes are kind of interesting. Students can use their cell phones and then type in things like what they took away from a particular section that you went over, or issue spotting, right? Give them a fact pattern, and then they can pull out the issue, which is something students sometimes really like to have practice with. And there are other things too we could talk about with assessments. It's interesting, the pandemic made me rethink things about assessments. In particular, I wrote up many quiz questions to go along with each unit in my course book, my case book, because it was something that I realized was going to be helpful no matter what method or how we were doing delivery of the course content, that it would be important. And so we share those with the adopters of my book. But so why use current events? I think there's a number of reasons. You're going to increase student engagement. You want this to be fun for them as well as for you. And it's just more exciting when you see a lot of hands raised here in the classroom. It improves learning outcomes when people are actively engaged in what they're learning and they want to talk, or they're writing about something, or you give them a minute to encapsulate what you just did and put it in writing or in a QR code or something like that. When you're active and actually engaged and have to produce something, you're going to have better quality learning. And I think the last piece, why you would want to include current events in your class, is it does allow for more diverse and inclusive materials to be used. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute and my philosophy towards that. But I will say, as the other reason for engagement, I think, is because education, this is a quote from William Butler Yeats, but education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. So you want people to get excited. You want people to go out and find things on their own. I have students every year who are sending me news stories, who are sending me information. It's obvious that they've become excited about the material, and that they're going out and really have this interest sparked in them in a subject that many of them thought they didn't really know much about it when they started. So that's always exciting. So how do we do this, and what kinds of things, will get discussion really going? I will tell you the instance that really got me interested in actually becoming a law teacher was watching a documentary on Nova. This is about 2 decades ago at this point, but there's an ongoing court battle about the ownership of a T-Rex aptly named Sue. It was found on one of the most valuable T-Rex skeletons ever found, and it was found in South Dakota on tribal land. And fossil hunters were paid the landowner about $6,000 to look around, again, quote unquote, look around. And this is a very valuable from a scientific standpoint, but also because it's so rare, very high monetary value, later sold at auction for $10 million. And so this was an ongoing litigation between the federal government, the tribe, the individual landowner, and the fossil hunters who found it. And so the problem in the book asks students to identify various contract defenses that could be initiated here. And I show part of the documentary, students talk about it, and currently the fossils on display in Chicago's Field Museum. There's a lot of ways to kind of get people talking about things that have just happened even more recently than a couple decades ago. In my casebook, I have examples everywhere from, the Megadeth case. They're arguing over a settlement of their various legal issues. The band has broken up and gotten back together several times. Sandra Bullock had a construction dispute with her building a lake house with her contractor. 50 Cent, there was a palimony lawsuit and questions about how finances were being split up, and Lady Gaga split up with her manager in a very interesting accord and satisfaction case. And when students see that these are folks that they know, they really become interested in learning more about what's going on in the materials, and they'll ask a lot of questions and really get engaged. And I'll just give a couple more examples. There was a painting that got destroyed. Banksy's self-destructing painting. Students really love this one. And it's an example that I have in the casebook that I added in from the second edition. I also added in some material about closures due to force majeure clauses. So this is the virus over Broadway is what I call the problem. But these are all interesting, and people just want to talk about them. And I love talking about all of these examples. But I think the other reason why I really enjoy and have come up with a current events structured casebook is because I do think using things that are in the news, it stimulates people to talk. But it's not just that. I think it also gives a much more rich and diverse set of participants in the course. And that's important, at least in contracts, because much of what you read is back from the time of industrialization. You get discussions of things like an astrolabe and, lost ships at sea. And students today have a bit of a hard time relating to that. So you want to meet them a bit where they live. And the other pieces that I've really worked hard in this edition to include materials that will include things like how we got to the racial wealth gap and the role that contract law has placed in that, some critical legal studies, feminist theories of contract to include those perspectives. And that came down to even things like the naming convention. So Bob and Sally, that's a common thing in many case books, just or generic A and B. And I've really gone out of my way to make sure that I was inclusive and ran this past a couple folks in diversity and inclusion, so that this wouldn't just be bolted on, it would be throughout the casebook and would be included. So a couple parting words here from me. I'm realizing my time is running out, and that's important to think about actually when you're teaching things like that. I didn't put that on here, but people staying to their time is important. But as Professor Medill said, you want to examine the teacher's manual. That's a resource available to you. Does it do things like provide briefs for the case? Does it provide sample answers and rubrics? I do provide all these things in my casebook. That's very important to me to have an answer for every question. PowerPoint slides, quizzes, things like that. You want to ask questions, just as Professor Medill said. Finding a teaching mentor, very important. And, ask the author, as she said, most of us really enjoy talking about what we work on. We really enjoy hearing from people who are thinking about it. So I'll leave you with some do's and don'ts here really quickly. So find a teaching mentor. Get that textbook that has a good teacher's manual. Experiment. This is supposed to be fun. Try something new. Maybe not all at once. Not the first time you teach. Not the first day. But have fun with it. And if something doesn't work, it's an experiment. You can always go back. One thing my teaching mentor told me was there's always another day when you can go back, and if the experiment didn't work, you can try it another way. So don't be afraid to have fun and try things out. As far as don'ts, and I think Professor Medill already went over the page ranges and things. I had a colleague who assigned numerous books to his class and then realized as he was assigning them that meant he had to read them all, and you don't read them just, in a way you do as a student, maybe skimming or something. You have to read everything very closely because you're going to get questions about what you assigned. So it means you have to read it too. So, my suggestion would be, stick to what is assigned, and don't ask a question in class that you don't know the answer to. It comes back to making sure your textbook has answers to the questions. You can kind of think through it. Wouldn't just pose a hypo for the first time that you hadn't thought out in advance, maybe with your teaching mentor or a friend, a colleague. And finally, last piece, just as she had said, I wouldn't put syllabus dates because then it just get out of date fairly quickly. But like I said, on the do's, maybe I'll come back to that for 1 second. Really do have fun. This really is, like I said, the very best job that you can possibly have. So welcome everyone to what I think is a wonderful profession. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to Deborah Gordon. Thank you so much.